Nobody took her pie seriously until she won $50 and a marriage proposal from the mountain man. The autumn of 1823 arrived in Copper Creek with a crispness that promised an early winter. Mary Ann Hayes stood at the kitchen window of her grandmother's modest cabin, watching the morning mist rise from the valley below. At 24, she had grown accustomed to the sideways glances and whispered comments that followed her through town. Her substantial figure, inherited from her Scottish grandmother along with her copper hair and green eyes, made her the subject of endless speculation and unkind jokes. "They say no man will ever want a woman who takes up 2 seats at church," she'd overheard Mrs. Thornton tell her daughter just last Sunday. But Mary Ann had learned to wrap herself in dignity like a cloak. She had her grandmother, her small herb garden, and her baking, the one thing that brought her pure joy. When her hands worked dough or crimped pie crusts, the cruel world faded away. Her grandmother, Agnes, shuffled into the kitchen, her joints creaking like the floorboards beneath her feet. "You're up early, lass." "Couldn't sleep, Gran. Been thinking about the harvest festival." Agnes's weathered face crinkled into a knowing smile. "About the pie competition, you mean?" Mary Ann turned from the window, her cheeks flushing. "It's foolish, isn't it? The entry fee alone is $2, money we can barely spare." "Foolish?" Agnes moved to the table and sat down heavily. "Let me tell you what's foolish. Foolish is hiding your light under a bushel because some small-minded folk can't see past their own noses. That pie recipe has been in our family for 6 generations. Your great-great-great-grandmother made it for Bonnie Prince Charlie himself before we had to flee Scotland. Gran, you know those stories get bigger with each telling. The recipe doesn't lie, child, and neither does your gift. I've tasted fancy confections in Edinburgh before we left. Delicate things that looked like art, but tasted like sawdust. Your pies have soul." Agnes reached across the table and took Mary Ann's flour-dusted hand. "The prize is $50. That's enough to fix the roof before winter, buy proper supplies for your baking, maybe even start that little shop you've been dreaming about." Mary Ann felt tears prick her eyes. The shop had been a whispered dream, something she barely admitted to herself in the darkest hours of night. A place where people came not to mock her, but to taste the magic she could create with butter, flour, and fruit. "What if I fail? What if they laugh?" "Then let them laugh, but I think you'll surprise them all." 2 weeks later, Mary Ann stood in the town square, her precious pie basket clutched in trembling hands. The harvest festival had transformed Copper Creek into a carnival of color and noise. Banners streamed from the buildings, fiddlers tuned their instruments on a makeshift stage, and the smell of roasting meat and wood smoke hung thick in the air. The pie competition table stood near the gazebo, already crowded with entries. Mary Ann's heart sank as she took in the competition. There was Mrs. Thornton's elaborate creation, 4 layers high with spun sugar decorations that sparkled in the sunlight. Miss Constance Fairfax, the banker's daughter, had submitted what looked like a European torte, complete with candied violets arranged in perfect spirals. Even the mayor's wife had entered, her pie displayed on a silver platter with her family crest engraved on the rim. 30 entries in total, each one more impressive than the last. Most came from the wealthy families who could afford white sugar, imported chocolate, exotic spices from the Orient. Mary Ann's simple apple pie, made with wild apples she'd foraged herself, honey from their 2 hives, and precious cinnamon she'd saved for months, looked impossibly humble by comparison. "Well, well," came a familiar cutting voice. Mary Ann turned to find Rebecca Sullivan, the sheriff's daughter, regarding her with barely concealed contempt. "I'm surprised they let you enter. Isn't there a weight limit for the competition?" The women around Rebecca tittered like cruel birds. Mary Ann felt her face burn, but she held her head high. "The only limit is on cruelty, Miss Sullivan, though I see you exceed it regularly." Before Rebecca could respond, a booming voice cut through the chatter. "Ladies and gentlemen, Welcome to the 23rd Annual Copper Creek Pie Competition. Mayor Hutchinson, resplendent in his finest suit despite the casual frontier setting, climbed onto a small platform. As you know, our competition this year features the largest prize pool in our history, $50 in gold, generously sponsored by the Copper Creek Mining Company. Our judges this year are particularly distinguished. Please welcome Mrs. Adelaide Pritchard, winner of last year's competition, Reverend Thomas Walsh, Mr. Chen Wei, proprietor of Chen's General Store, Mrs. Dorothy Hayes, no relation to any contestants, and our special guest judge, fresh from 3 years in the Rocky Mountains, Mr. Ethan Cole. A murmur rippled through the crowd as a man stepped forward. Marianne found herself staring despite herself. Ethan Cole was tall and lean, his face weathered by sun and wind into the color of old leather. His dark hair touched his shoulders, and a beard covered his jaw, but his eyes, sharp and intensely blue, missed nothing as they swept across the crowd. He wore buckskin pants and a simple cotton shirt, looking distinctly uncomfortable in the pressed social setting. Mr. Cole has agreed to judge based on his extensive travels throughout the Western Territories, the mayor continued. He's eaten at the finest establishments from St. Louis to New Orleans and survived on his own cooking in the wilderness. His palate, I'm assured, is both educated and honest. The judging began. One by one, the pies were presented, cut, and tasted. The judges made notes on small cards, occasionally conferring in whispers. The crowd pressed close, and Marianne found herself pushed to the back, unable to see clearly. She watched Mrs. Thornton's elaborate creation earn approving nods. The mayor's wife's pie received polite applause. Miss Fairfax's torte brought actual exclamations of delight from Mrs. Pritchard. Finally, they reached number 27, her pie. As one of the volunteers lifted her simple basket, Marianne heard Rebecca's voice carry across the square. "Oh, this should be rich. The fat girl probably ate half of it on the way here." Laughter erupted around her. Marianne felt the familiar sting of humiliation, but something shifted inside her. She thought of Gran, weak with fever last winter because they couldn't afford proper medicine. She thought of the leaking roof, the threadbare clothes, the endless small deprivations that came with being poor in a town that valued prosperity above all else. Let them laugh now, she thought. Let them taste it first. The judges each received a slice. Mrs. Pritchard took a small, delicate bite, then paused. Her eyebrows rose. Reverend Walsh ate his portion slowly, his expression thoughtful. Mr. Chenway smiled slightly, nodding to himself. But it was Ethan Cole's reaction that changed everything. He lifted his fork, took a substantial bite, and went completely still. His eyes closed. For a long moment, he didn't move, didn't speak. The crowd fell silent, watching him. Then he opened his eyes, and Marianne saw something there she couldn't quite name. Surprise, recognition, something almost like pain. "This," he said quietly, his rough voice carrying in the sudden silence, "tastes like home." He took another bite and another, finishing his entire piece while the other judges watched. Then he set down his fork and looked directly at Mayor Hutchinson. "I need to know who made this." The mayor consulted his list, his eyebrows climbing. "That would be Miss Marianne Hayes." A collective gasp went through the crowd. Rebecca Sullivan's mouth fell open. Mrs. Thornton looked as though she'd been slapped. Ethan's blue eyes scanned the crowd until they found Marianne, still standing in the back, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other across the sea of people. The remaining pies were judged, but the energy had shifted. The judges conferred at length, their discussion growing heated at times. Finally, Mayor Hutchinson returned to the platform, the gold coins gleaming in a small pouch in his hand. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have our winner." The judges were unanimous, which is unprecedented in the 23-year history of this competition. He paused for dramatic effect. First place in the $50 prize goes to Miss Marianne Hayes. The silence that followed was deafening. Then, slowly, applause began, scattered at first, then growing. Not everyone clapped. Rebecca and her circle stood with arms crossed, faces dark with resentment, but others, perhaps remembering their own struggles or tiring of the social hierarchy that governed their small town, began to cheer. Marianne made her way forward on shaking legs. The mayor pressed the pouch into her hands, heavier than she'd imagined. $50, a fortune, enough to change everything. "Speech!" someone called out. Marianne's throat closed. She'd never been good with words, never been one to draw attention, but she looked out at the crowd, at the mixture of faces, some kind, some cruel, most simply curious, and found her voice. "Thank you," she said quietly. "This pie was made with a recipe passed down through my family for generations. It came with us from Scotland, survived the crossing, and has been baked with love by the women of my family for longer than I can count. It's not fancy. It doesn't have sugar decorations or imported ingredients. It just has butter, flour, wild apples, honey, and spices, simple things made special by care and tradition. Thank you for seeing past appearances to taste what's real." She stepped down, her face burning, and pushed through the crowd toward home. Behind her she heard Ethan Cole's voice. "Wait!" But she kept walking, clutching her prize, tears streaming down her face, tears of joy, relief, and something else she couldn't name. That evening, as she sat with Gran counting out the gold coins by candlelight, a knock came at the door. Marianne opened it to find Ethan Cole standing on her porch, hat in his hands, looking even more uncomfortable than he had at the festival. "Miss Hayes," he said, "I apologize for calling unannounced. I needed to ask you something." "Mr. Cole, please come in." He ducked through the low doorway, his eyes adjusting to the dim interior. Gran sat by the fire, watching him with shrewd eyes. "You'll be the judge who made my granddaughter a winner," Agnes said. "Sit yourself down." Ethan perched on the edge of a chair, looking for all the world like a wild thing trapped indoors. "Mrs. Hayes, Miss Hayes, I want to be direct. That pie today, where did you learn to make it?" "It's our family recipe," Marianne said, confused. "From Scotland. Gran taught me, and her mother taught her." "From what part of Scotland?" "The Highlands, near Inverness. Why do you ask?" Ethan was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "My mother was from Inverness. She came to America as an indentured servant, met my father, a trapper, and they settled in Kentucky. She died when I was 12. But before she did, she taught me about her home. She used to make a pie, an apple pie with honey and spices that tasted like nothing else in the world. I haven't had anything like it in 20 years. Until today." Marianne felt something shift in her chest. "Your mother's pie tasted exactly like yours. Same crust, thin and crisp. Same filling, not too sweet with that hint of cinnamon and ginger. Same soul, I guess you'd call it." He looked up, meeting her eyes. "I've traveled from the Mississippi to the Pacific Ocean. I've eaten in restaurants that charge more for one meal than most people make in a month. I've tasted food from a dozen different cultures. But today when I bit into your pie, I was 12 years old again, sitting in my mother's kitchen, feeling loved and safe. Do you understand what a gift that is?" Marianne's throat tightened. "I do." "I have a proposal," Ethan said, then flushed. "Not that kind. Not yet, anyway. I mean a business proposal." He pulled a folded paper from his pocket. "I want to learn how to make that pie. I want you to teach me." "Teach you?" Marianne laughed, surprised. "You're a mountain man. Surely you know how to cook." "I can make jerky, hardtack, and stew that won't kill you, but I can't create something that makes people feel the way your pie did today. I saw their faces, Miss Hayes. Half that crowd was ready to run you out of town for daring to enter that competition, but after they tasted your pie, even the ones who wanted to hate it couldn't. It's not just cooking. That's magic. It's not magic, Marianne said softly. It's love. My gran says you can't bake anything worth eating without putting love into it. Then teach me that too, Agnes cackled from her chair by the fire. Boy wants to learn, Marianne. I say let him. Better than those empty-headed women who think cooking is beneath them because they have servants. And so it began. 3 times a week, Ethan appeared at their cabin just after dawn. He brought firewood, which they desperately needed, and wild game that helped stretch their supplies. In return, Marianne taught him the basics of baking. He was terrible at first, absolutely terrible. His large, calloused hands, so skilled at skinning animals and building shelters, struggled with the delicate work of pastry. He mixed the dough too long, making it tough. He rolled it too thick. He forgot ingredients or added too much. The first pie he attempted came out of the oven looking like a geological disaster. The crust burned on one side, raw on the other, the filling having boiled over into a sticky, blackened mess. Marianne tried not to laugh. She failed. Go ahead, Ethan said, grinning ruefully. I deserve it. I'm sorry, she gasped, wiping tears of mirth from her eyes. You looked so confident when you started. And then I proved I'm better at surviving in the wilderness than creating edible food in a kitchen. He looked at the ruined pie. My mother would be ashamed. No, Marianne said, suddenly serious. She'd be proud that you're trying, that you care enough to learn. Over the following weeks, something unexpected happened. Ethan improved, slowly but steadily. More importantly, they talked. As Marianne's hands demonstrated techniques and Ethan's larger ones tried to replicate them, they shared stories. Ethan told her about his years in the mountains, the terrible beauty of the high peaks, the loneliness that ate at a man's soul, the way silence could be either peaceful or maddening depending on the day. He'd gone into the wilderness after his father died, seeking something he couldn't name. He'd found survival, but not peace. I thought I wanted solitude, he admitted one morning as he carefully peeled apples, finally mastering the technique of creating one long, continuous spiral of skin. Turns out what I wanted was to escape. There's a difference. Escape from what? Marianne asked. From people who looked at me and saw only my father, a drunk who traded whiskey to Indians and couldn't keep a job, from a town that decided what I was before I had a chance to choose for myself, from expectations and judgments and all the small cruelties that people inflict because they can. He paused. I guess we're not so different, you and I. Marianne felt her cheeks warm. People have been cruel to you? In different ways, maybe. But yes, my father's reputation followed me like a shadow. Every job I took, every friendship I tried to form, there was always someone ready to whisper, "You know who his father is, don't you?" After a while, I stopped trying to prove them wrong. I just left. And did it help? The leaving? Ethan considered this as he arranged apple slices in the pie pan. For a while, yes, but you can't run forever. Eventually, you realize that what you're running from isn't the place or the people. It's yourself. Your own fear of not being good enough, of confirming their worst opinions. Marianne worked in silence for a moment, crimping the edges of her own demonstration pie. I never learned to run, she said finally. This town is all I've ever known. My parents died when I was young. Fever took them both within days of each other. Gran raised me. We've always been poor, always been on the margins, and I've always been... She gestured at herself. This. Beautiful? Ethan said quietly. Marianne's hands stilled. She looked up at him, certain she'd misheard. You're beautiful, Marianne. Your kindness, your patience, your passion for your craft, it shines through everything you do. Anyone who can't see that is blind. People see my size first, she whispered. Everything else comes second. Then they're fools. You know what I see when I look at you? I see someone who turned mockery into mastery. Someone who took a family recipe and made it something that could bring a grown man to tears. Someone who has every reason to be bitter, but chooses grace instead. He reached across the table and took her hand, his rough fingers gentle against her softer ones. I see someone I'd very much like to know better if she'll let me. Before Marianne could respond, Agnes's voice crackled from the doorway. Those pies going to bake themselves, or are you two going to moon at each other all day? They sprang apart, both blushing like children caught stealing cookies. But as they worked, Marianne felt something bloom in her chest, something warm and precious and terrifying. Hope. The weeks passed, autumn deepening into early winter. Ethan's pies improved dramatically. By the 8th week, he produced an apple pie that made Agnes nod in approval, high praise from the exacting Scotswoman. But something else was growing alongside Ethan's skills. The air between him and Marianne crackled with unspoken feeling. Their hands lingered when they touched, passing ingredients or adjusting dough. Their conversations stretched later into the evening, ranging from cooking to philosophy to dreams neither had dared voice before. Then came the day that changed everything. It was December, and an early snow had blanketed Copper Creek. Marianne woke to find Gran unmoving in her bed, her face gray, her breathing shallow and labored. Terror seized her heart. "Gran, Gran, please!" The old woman's eyes fluttered open. "Hurts," she whispered. "Chest hurts." Marianne ran for the doctor, heedless of the snow soaking through her thin shoes and the cold burning her lungs. Dr. Morrison came, examined Gran with his lips pressed into a grim line, and delivered his verdict. "Her heart is failing. I can give her medicine to ease the pain, but—" He trailed off, the implication clear. "How long?" Marianne asked, her voice breaking. "Days, maybe a week if she's strong." The medicine cost $10, a fifth of her prize money, but Marianne didn't hesitate. What good was money if Gran wasn't there to share in the security it brought? Word spread quickly in the small town. Some came to offer condolences. Others, like Rebecca Sullivan and Mrs. Thornton, stayed conspicuously away, as if poverty and illness might be contagious. Ethan appeared within an hour of hearing the news. He took one look at Marianne's tear-stained face and pulled her into his arms. She collapsed against him, finally letting herself break. "I can't lose her," she sobbed. "She's all I have." "You have me," Ethan said fiercely. "For as long as you want me, you have me." Over the next week, he proved those words. He brought firewood and kept the cabin warm. He cooked simple meals, forcing Marianne to eat even when she insisted she couldn't. He sat with Gran when Marianne needed to rest, reading to the old woman from her favorite psalms. On the 5th day, during a moment when the medicine had eased Agnes's pain enough for her to speak clearly, she called them both to her bedside. "Don't look so grim, you two," she rasped. "I've had 83 years, more than most get, and I'm leaving knowing my girl will be cared for." "Gran, don't," Marianne pleaded. "Hush, I need to say this while I can." Agnes's gnarled hand found Ethan's. "You're a good man. I saw it that first night you came calling. You look at my Marianne the way a man should look at a woman he loves, like she's the sun and the stars and everything in between." Ethan's throat worked. "She is." "Then don't waste time being proper. Life's too short for all that nonsense. Marry her. Fill this cabin with babies and laughter. Teach them to bake and teach them to be brave." Agnes turned to Marianne. "And you, lass, don't you dare shrink from happiness because you think you don't deserve it. You deserve everything good this world has to offer." "I love you, Gran," Marianne whispered. "I know, and I love you, always have, always will, even when I'm gone." Agnes closed her eyes, smiling. "Now leave me be. I'm tired." She died 3 days later, just before dawn, with Marianne holding her hand and Ethan standing watch. It was peaceful as such things could be. Her last words were in Gaelic, something about going home. The funeral was small. Father Walsh said the words over the grave in the churchyard. Marianne stood dry-eyed and hollow, feeling as though she'd left part of herself in the ground with Gran. That evening, Ethan found her in the cabin, staring at Gran's empty chair. "I know what you're thinking," he said gently. "You're thinking you're alone now. Aren't I?" "No, and I'm going to prove it to you." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small cloth-wrapped package. "I made something for you. It's not perfect, probably never will be, but I made it with everything you and your grandmother taught me." Marianne unwrapped the cloth to reveal a small apple pie, still warm, the crust golden and perfectly crimped. The smell of it, cinnamon and honey and love, brought tears to her eyes. "Look inside," Ethan urged. She cut into it carefully, and something fell onto the plate. A piece of paper, folded small and wrapped in wax to protect it from the filling. With trembling hands, she unfolded it. "Will you marry me? I promise to be your worst student and your best partner. I promise to love you in front of everyone who ever doubted you. I promise to build you a life worthy of your dreams. I promise to try every day to be the man you deserve, even though I'll probably fail at that as spectacularly as I failed at my first pie. But I'll keep trying. Please say yes." Marianne looked up at him through tears and found him kneeling beside her chair. "I know it's soon," Ethan said. "I know you're grieving. We can wait as long as you need. But I wanted you to know that you're not alone, and you never will be again. I love you, Marianne Hayes. I think I started falling for you the moment I tasted that pie and realized it was made by someone who understood that the best things in life are simple, honest, and made with soul." "Yes," Marianne whispered. Then, louder, "Yes." He stood and lifted her into his arms. She gasped, expecting him to struggle, but he held her as though she weighed nothing. "You're sure? Even though I'll probably burn dinner half the time?" "I'm sure. Even though you'll definitely burn dinner half the time." They were married 3 weeks later, in a simple ceremony at the church. Marianne wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit her. Ethan wore new clothes purchased with his savings, the first time most of the town had seen him in anything but buckskins. The reception was small, held in the church hall. Marianne had baked a wedding cake, a grand creation that demonstrated every skill Gran had taught her. But it was Ethan's contribution that made people stop and stare. A dozen small apple pies, one for each table, each made by his own hands. "They're not as good as my wife's," he announced to the assembled guests. "But they're made with love, and that's what matters. Marianne taught me that. She also taught me that people who judge based on appearances miss out on life's greatest gifts. I almost made that mistake. I'm grateful every day that I didn't." Rebecca Sullivan left early, her face pinched with resentment. But others, those who had been kind, and even some who had been cruel, lined up to wish them well and taste both the wedding cake and Ethan's pies. "Not bad," Mr. Chenway admitted, sampling one of Ethan's creations. "You have learned well." "I had an exceptional teacher." They spent their wedding night in the cabin, their cabin now. Ethan had used the last of his savings to pay off the land taxes and ensure they owned it free and clear. As they lay together in the darkness, listening to the winter wind howl outside, Marianne felt something she'd never experienced before: complete contentment. "What are you thinking?" Ethan murmured against her hair. "That I'm happy, truly happy. Is that wrong with Gran so recently gone? Your grandmother wanted you to be happy. She told me so. She said you'd spent too much of your life being strong for others. It was time for someone to be strong for you." "She really said that?" "She did. She also made me promise that we'd name our first daughter after her." Marianne smiled in the darkness. "Agnes is a strong name." "It is, though I'm hoping for a son first." "Oh, already planning our family, are you?" "I've been planning our family since the day I tasted your pie," Ethan admitted. I imagined a house full of children who bake with their mother and learn to hunt with their father. Children who know they're loved, who never have to run from cruel words or hide their light. He pulled her closer. Is that too much to ask? It's not enough, Marianne whispered. I want all of that and more. I want our children to know both of their grandmother's recipes, Gran's pies and your mother's memories. I want to fill this cabin with so much love that it spills out the windows and doors. Then that's what we'll do. The next morning, they woke to find a letter that had been slipped under their door. Inside was a formal notice from the town council, along with a check for an unexpected sum. What is it? Marianne asked. Ethan read the letter aloud. Dear Mr. and Mrs. Cole, the town council has voted to grant you the use of the old mercantile building on Main Street, rent-free for 1 year, to be used for the establishment of a bakery. Additionally, the council has authorized a small business grant to help with initial supplies and equipment. It is our hope that you will consider making Copper Creek your permanent home and sharing Mrs. Cole's exceptional talents with our community. Signed, Mayor Hutchinson and the Town Council. Marianne stared at the letter, then at the check. $50, matching her competition winnings. I don't understand. Why would they do this? Read the postscript. She took the letter back. In different handwriting at the bottom was written, Not everyone in this town is blind or cruel. Some of us recognize greatness when we taste it. Consider this an investment in our community's future and an apology for how you've been treated. Give us a chance to do better. Tears streamed down Marianne's face. The bakery, my bakery, it's real. Our bakery, Ethan corrected gently, if you'll have me as your partner. I wouldn't have it any other way. They opened Hayes & Cole Bakery in the spring of 1824. The old mercantile building, with its large windows and spacious interior, transformed under their care. Ethan built shelves and counters while Marianne painted and planned. They used half of their remaining prize money for supplies, saving the rest for emergencies. The first day they opened, a line stretched down the street. Some came out of genuine interest. Others came out of curiosity or skepticism. But everyone who tried Marianne's baking left as a convert. Her apple pies became legendary, but they weren't her only offering. She made berry tarts in summer, pumpkin pies in fall, and rich dark cakes for winter. She created sweetbreads studded with nuts and dried fruit, cookies that melted on the tongue, and pastries so light they seemed to float. Ethan handled deliveries in the front counter, his easy manner and genuine warmth winning over even those who had been skeptical. He also continued to bake, though he freely admitted his creations would never match his wife's. Why do you keep trying? A customer asked one day, watching Ethan carefully score the top of a pie before putting it in the oven. Because baking is love made visible, Ethan replied, and I want to keep showing my wife how much I love her. The bakery thrived beyond their wildest expectations. Within 6 months, they had not only paid off the initial supplies, but saved enough to hire help. Sarah, a young widow who needed work, and Tom, a freed slave who had been a cook before the war and knew his way around an oven. A year after they opened, Marianne discovered she was pregnant. She told Ethan on the anniversary of their first meeting, presenting him with a small apple pie that had a message written in pastry on top. Father. He stared at it for a full minute before the meaning sank in. Then he swept her up and spun her around, laughing and crying at the same time. Put me down before you hurt yourself, Marianne protested, but she was laughing too. Hurt myself? Woman, you weigh nothing. Besides, I've been training for this. Do you know how many 50-pound sacks of flour I've carried this year? Their daughter was born in the spring of 1825, healthy and loud and perfect. They named her Agnes, and she had her mother's copper hair and her father's blue eyes. 2 years later came Ethan Jr., solemn and thoughtful even as a baby. Then came Charlotte, fierce and fearless, followed finally by William, sweet-tempered and gentle. The cabin became too small, so Ethan built them a real house with 4 bedrooms and a large kitchen where Mary Ann could teach their children to bake. They kept Gran's old cabin too, using it for storage and as a reminder of where they'd started. Every year on the anniversary of the pie competition, they closed the bakery and spent the day as a family. Ethan would bake an apple pie for Mary Ann, using Gran's recipe that she'd taught him so painstakingly. The pies were never quite as good as hers. Something essential was always slightly off, but Mary Ann treasured them more than the finest confections from Boston or New York. "Why?" little Agnes asked one year, watching her father pull a slightly lopsided pie from the oven. "Why does Papa bake when you're so much better at it?" Mary Ann pulled her daughter onto her lap. "Because love isn't about being perfect. It's about trying, about caring enough to keep practicing even when you'll never be the best. Your father's pies tell me every year that he loves me enough to do something difficult, just to make me smile." "That's silly," Charlotte declared, but she was smiling. "That's love," Mary Ann corrected. The bakery became a cornerstone of Copper Creek. It was where people gathered to celebrate births and mourn deaths, where marriage proposals were made over coffee and cake, where children pressed their noses against the glass to watch Mary Ann work her magic. Rebecca Sullivan, the former sheriff's daughter, came in one day, 5 years after the wedding. She approached the counter with stiff formality, her face carefully neutral. "Mrs. Cole," she said, "I need to order a cake for my engagement party." Mary Ann looked at her for a long moment, remembering all the cruel words, all the casual cruelties. Then she smiled. "Congratulations, Miss Sullivan. When is the happy day?" Rebecca blinked, clearly surprised by the genuine warmth. "June. Thank you. What kind of cake would you like?" They spent the next hour discussing options. As Rebecca prepared to leave, she paused at the door. "Mrs. Cole, I owe you an apology. For years of apologies, really. I was cruel to you because—" She stopped, struggling. "Because I envied you. Your talent, your kindness, the way you never let us break you. And now, seeing all you've built, I'm ashamed of who I was." "Then be better going forward," Mary Ann said simply. "That's all any of us can do." Rebecca nodded, tears in her eyes, and left. Her engagement cake was one of the finest Mary Ann ever made, not because she'd forgiven the cruelty, but because she'd moved beyond it. 10 years after the pie competition, Mayor Hutchinson held a ceremony to honor the bakery's anniversary. The whole town turned out. Ethan and Mary Ann stood in front of their shop, their 4 children arranged around them, and listened as the mayor spoke about community, perseverance, and the power of believing in people. "Mary Ann Hayes came to us as an underdog," he said, "someone most people had dismissed, overlooked, or actively scorned. But she had something that fancy ingredients and silver platters can't buy: heart, skill, and the courage to try even when failure seemed certain. Today, Hayes & Cole Bakery is our town's most beloved business. But more than that, it's proof that we're capable of being better than our prejudices. Thank you, Mary Ann and Ethan, for choosing to build your dream here and for giving us a chance to be part of it." The applause was thunderous. Mary Ann, holding baby William, felt tears stream down her face. But this time, they were tears of joy. That evening, after the children were in bed and the house was quiet, Ethan and Mary Ann sat on their porch, watching the sun set over the valley. "Do you ever regret it?" Ethan asked. "Staying here instead of going somewhere new, somewhere people didn't know the old stories?" Mary Ann considered this, rocking gently in her chair. "No. Running from our pain doesn't heal it. Staying, building something good, proving them wrong, that heals it. Besides, this is home. Gran is buried here. Our children are growing up here. Our dreams are built into the very foundation of this town now. You're wiser than I am. I'm more stubborn. There's a difference." She reached over and took his hand. "Besides, I had help. A mountain man who missed his mother's pie enough to change his whole life. A man who saw past what everyone else saw and found something worth loving. That part was easy, Ethan said. You're the easiest person in the world to love. They sat in comfortable silence as stars began to emerge in the darkening sky. From inside the house came the sound of Charlotte singing to her dolls and Ethan Jr. explaining something complicated to Agnes in his serious way. Do you think they'll remember? Marianne asked. Years from now, when we're gone, will they remember what all this means? That it started with a pie and a bet against cruel odds? They'll remember, Ethan assured her, because we'll tell them, and they'll tell their children, and their children's children. They'll tell the story of the woman who turned mockery into mastery, who proved that worth isn't measured in pounds or dollars, but in passion and persistence. They'll tell the story of how an old Scottish recipe brought two lonely people together and built a legacy. That's a lot of weight for one pie to carry. Then it's a good thing you make your crusts strong. Marianne laughed, the sound carrying across the valley like a blessing. Inside the house, their children's voices rose in a familiar squabble, and Ethan made to rise and intervene, but Marianne stopped him. Let them work it out. We can't solve all their problems. No, but we can make sure they know they're loved enough to solve them themselves. He settled back into his chair, still holding her hand. Just like someone taught me, once upon a time, in a kitchen that smelled like cinnamon and hope. And pie. Don't forget the pie. Never, Ethan promised. I'll never forget the pie. Above them, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns. The bakery stood silent on Main Street, ready for tomorrow's customers and tomorrow's celebrations. And in a small house on a hill, two people who had found each other against all odds sat together, watching the night unfold, knowing that sometimes the smallest acts of courage, entering a competition, offering to learn, choosing to love, can change everything. The pie that started it all was long gone, consumed by judges and townspeople years ago. But its legacy remained, baked into every loaf of bread and pastry that came out of Hayes and Cole Bakery. A legacy of love, perseverance, and the stubborn belief that people, like recipes, are worth the patience it takes to help them rise.